Washington must land these underrated prospects.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Lars got a really fun show coming at all day, every day today. Just a reminder, wherever you're getting this, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you listen, watch this podcast, make sure you hit that subscribe button right here on YouTube, on whatever audio service it might be. It all really does help us out a lot. Leave us a 5-star review over there. Leave a comment on which of your favorite recruits in this 2026 class you want to see Washington land. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, because we also need to get to, Lars, Washington, the rumored to be big spenders by On3 in the transfer portal when it opens today, as the everydayers listen to this on Monday. We're going to talk about Jedd Fisch and his staff as talent evaluators, because some of these guys that Washington is pushing for in the 2026 class have really blown up, and I don't think anybody embodies that more than Khary Wilder, the now 4-star defensive end from J. Sarah High School.
And see, that's the ironic part about including him in this underrated mix. He finally did get that 4-star, and it's like, okay, right. He was the most 4-star, 3-star we've had in this 2026 class. I almost said 25. Like, I honestly hate that so much. But anyways, different sidebar. But you look at J. Sarah High School, and it was always one of those schools where, going back into the mid 2010s and even before that, where, man, if you're getting a kid out of there, like you know what you're getting. The guy's basically just waiting 3 years to go to the NFL. And you can run down the list of Sarah guys where it's like, okay, yep, in the NFL, yep, in the NFL. And even though he's kind of, I don't want to say come on late, because he's going into his senior year, he's kind of in a way flown under the radar. But it's one of those guys where, man, we talk about how often do we talk about keeping guys on the West Coast home, and in this case, stay at Washington. And Washington's always been that school. And it seems under Jedd Fisch, it's kind of like you're rekindling a little bit of that. And I know people are going to hate to hear this, Sark energy, when a lot of Cali recruits started coming back up when Sark took over, and you had the Elijah Qualls of the world. And I'm not saying Elijah Qualls and Khary Wilder are the same person, but it's like that type of thing where you're getting a 3-star who, ends up being, a 3-4 year productive player for you down the line.
So I love where you're going with that. By the way, shout out J. Sarah. I don't need to go down this road right now, but Royce Lewis terrorized me once in high school, where he was a sophomore, I was a senior, and he just roped a single off me. J. Sarah just produces athletes across the board. 2017, number 1 overall MLB draft pick, by the way, for those of you who aren't baseball fans out there. But I've just been so impressed by Khary Wilder, and I'm glad you wanted to talk about that in terms of keeping him on the West Coast, because the other day, he got one of those big offers where it's, this kid's blown up when you get the Georgia offer. And he got that Georgia offer 4 or 5 days ago, I want to say. And that's one of those where, okay, when we get to the talent evaluation conversation a little bit, that's going to be one of those things where it's always gratifying when you see a couple schools like, you referenced it the other day, 3-star offensive tackle Aaron Thomas got that Ohio State offer, where it's, you're doing something right on the talent evaluation front when these are the kinds of schools that are coming in and offering these recruits. And with Khary Wilder, he's one of those ones that whenever I watch his film, it's not just that he can play, on the edge, that outside linebacker sort of role in Ryan Walsh's scheme if you want him to, because, he's listed at 6'4" and 250 pounds. Like, you want to move him inside and play that defensive tackle role, where we're going to have a very fun conversation about that coming up later this week. That's all I'm going to say about that for right now. So stay tuned for that. But I look at Khary Wilder and I say, if that guy's going to be a disruptive force on the interior as a pass rusher, I would love to see what that could be in the scheme. And I'm just really excited about what this defensive line class could look like, because another guy in that same mold is a 3-star defensive tackle, TI Umu-Cais from Colorado.
Yeah, and the one guy, when we talked about it after we got the Washington offer, it was like, man, the fact that you got it now, be glad you did, because now we're seeing that the list grow from, I think Washington was 21 or 22. Now like it's almost 32, and it's probably not going to stop growing, because there's just so many schools where that's like, I swear, like I said it before the show, where it's like, wow, I thought you were a 2025 recruit, and no, I'm actually a 26 recruit. It's like, oh wait, like you have the production of a guy who's been in high school for 4 years, and you have one more year left, and man. Interior defensive linemen are hard to come by. Like if you can do a guy, if you're already on the western part of the country, let's just say west of Texas, west of Iowa in this case, so hence the third segment there. But just on the western part of the country, you need to keep. We talk about Roger Rosengard. I know it's an offensive lineman, but there's names that guys that came from Colorado, Utah, and things like that. Anytime you can keep the mountain region on the West Coast, always a good thing. And I mean, it's not a great example, but you go back to Siler Miles. You've always had guys from Colorado that can kind of come and do a job. Was Devin Aguilar also from Colorado? I think he was.
Oh, I can't remember off the top of my head. That's criminal. I loved watching Devin Aguilar when he was at UW. But I'm really glad that with just the way Washington has prioritized defensive line recruiting, and it's not just going after the high end names, which is very important, by the way. I don't want to discount that. Talk about Derek Coleman versus he was from Colorado.
Yeah, Denver, Colorado.
Oh, yeah, I'm ashamed of myself that I blanked on that one. But it's not just going after the Derek Coleman Bruces, the James Carringtons of the world, Anthony Jones being another example of just one of those consensus 4-star guys that it's like, yeah, of course you want to go after these guys, right? Where TI Umu-Cais, we've said it before on the show, and we'll probably end up saying it again, is somebody who absolutely has the acumen to be a 4-star prospect, not just in terms of his offer list, but in terms of you turn on the film, and he is one of those guys that I'm so intrigued by, and we bring up on the show over and over again. We're talking about right now as a potential building block of this 2026 class. It's because he is a really, really intelligent player. It's so hard. And it's one of the reasons I'm shocked he's not a 4-star. It's so hard to go out and find some of these defensive tackles that already have the size that you're looking for at 6'4", 307. That is certainly solid enough. I don't think that's necessarily elite, but it's certainly solid enough to play in the Big Ten or in the SEC. But just he's so intelligent, and I say that because of the way he uses his hands, the way he already understands how to rush the passer from the interior, where you see so many guys at the high school level that are just like, hey, I'm 6'5", 320, whatever it is. Yeah, I don't need to work on my pass rushing because I can just bull rush every single player. And then they get to the next level and they have trouble. And sometimes they still turn into great players, don't get me wrong. But it takes them a couple of years to just develop and learn how to use their hands properly. And that's not something that you see when you watch TI Umu-Cais. So it's great that Ryan Walters identified that and offered him when he did. And now moving forward, it's, hey, if you're able to secure a commitment from that guy, I think that that's just a really solid piece of your defensive line class moving forward if you compare that with somebody like Khary Wilder.
Exactly, and that's the key point, the pairing, not just getting one or the other. This is because we talked about it. You go back to the Kalen board, is stacking talent. Now, granted that Kalen didn't do that in the recruiting class, we're more so with Jedd did, but you're stacking talent on the roster. That's really what you're looking to do. Where we talk about how young the defensive line group is, let them sort it out. Like that's a good problem to have. Like, yeah, you have the portal, maybe guys will leave. Like again, if whoever ends up staying is better, that's problem to sort out in a couple of years, 18 months from now. But it's all about making sure you get all of them together. And it speaks to the big weekend that they had with the junior day, which is, look, we're not afraid to hide it. Like, yeah, we have a large amount of guys that we want to get. We can't take all of you, obviously, all 48 of you. Granted, you're not all in the 26 class, but you're looking at it and saying, of your 36, call it, we should get about 20, 24.
Sure.
And of those two, and that also would include Dominic Harris in that same way, where guy from Nevada as an offensive lineman, where you're looking at guys thinking like, can you keep all these guys that are on maybe not necessarily to say like you mentioned the Derek Coleman Bruces, for all those guys that you want to have, you also make sure you can sprinkle it in with guys that are still from the West Coast footprint, not necessarily from Washington.
Sure. So one thing with Dominic Harris is something we talked about the last time we had this conversation. It's betting big on traits, where it's certainly not in every offensive lineman that you want to take. But I think Scott Huff was really good at identifying some of these guys and just saying, like, the example I brought up the other day was Solane Fasolo and Kaylee Tafai in the 23 class, where obviously that hasn't worked out necessarily the way you might have hoped it would, but it's not a bad take where it's, hey, this guy is, in Dominic Harris's case, a mid to upper tier 3-star, where it's the offer list looks nice. Washington was the first school to offer him, and the size is just elite. And you can bet big on those traits and say, hey, if you come in and you sit for a couple of years behind, let's say, Paki Finau kicks out to tackle one of these days, or Justin Hilkemar or John Mills takes over this position, it's fine. We can have this guy play for a couple of years and have these other guys sit and develop, because that's the most important part of offensive line. Stacking classes at every position is very, very important, but I don't think it's more important anywhere than the offensive line and the trenches as a whole, really. But Lars, all of this just speaks to that Jedd Fisch and his staff are really good talent evaluators. So Lars, I'm really glad we get to have that conversation because, as some of the everydayers know, we love to nerd out over talent evaluation and some of these guys that really can rise through the ranks, because Washington has historically, like since Chris Peterson got here, has been very good at finding some of these diamonds in the rough. And, unfortunately, sometimes they rise and rise and rise, and Washington finds themselves out of the mix at certain points in time. But this has always been a school that is so good at not just developing talent and sending it to the NFL, but finding it too.
Well, I think Washington's always been that brand, and kind of by proxy, and that brand attracts the type of coaches who know how to attract the right talent.
Yeah.
To get a kind of eclectic mix, if you will, of making sure you have the home state foundation locked down, but you need to also go into California. You can't just have a state built up of 85 guys from the state of Washington. Although that might be cool, you're never going to be in a world of like, hey, we're going to field an entire team from the state of Washington. But then you also have that Texas footprint where you talk about, there's always been a few guys from Texas you want to have, and really mixing in that. And then they've even gone, out to, the South with Caleb Smith, and, go to Alabama and Georgia and Florida by proxy with IMG, just because, guys, all over the country come from IMG. So it doesn't necessarily represent just Florida, but willing to also, because you have that brand of Washington. And Jedd, that's honestly why Jedd Fisch came to Washington. If you think about it, like Jedd was a good talent evaluator no matter where he was at. He got to show that at Arizona with that, McMillan, Coleman, Fafita, all those guys. And then he's bringing that to Washington, but even on a grander level where it's, hey, Washington doesn't have the 110-win season in a million years. It's that we need that almost every other year. Like Kalen showed, like, hey, you can get there pretty quickly if you have the right scheme and those sorts of things. And so that's, why Jedd Fisch has an offensive mind, knows how to evaluate quarterbacks, where you're looking at it and thinking, well, Brady Smackle, that's an easy one. But even looking at, Demond, and it's like, okay, well, just because you're undersized doesn't mean, I don't really want to work with that. Like Jedd's gone into length in terms of, hey, like, yeah, you could have quarterbacks that are, like Tom Brady, where they're like definitely not going to blow you away in the 40. And then you have the guys of, Demond and Noah, and just go down the list of like, okay, wow, yeah, Cam Newton a little separate there because it was just 1 year. But like you just look at it and think he's worked with such a variety of talent. Yeah. Now that's why we're seeing like, oh yeah, Dominic Harris, like your traits. Like, okay, we can work with 6'8", 325. Like we can work with all those sorts of things. And you have running a 5'1", like same thing with Ryan Walter. Like it's all working together, and now you can see it come to fruition.
So one guy I want to talk about in particular, where we mentioned Khary Wilder a little bit earlier and how much he's just kind of picked up steam on the recruiting trail to a point where he's one of those guys where my bold prediction right now is he does end up at Washington, and that's one I would certainly keep an eye on. But another one that I want to talk about who's seen a really meteoric rise, and I don't think Washington was ever really in the mix for the guy, but it was nice seeing them identify him so early, is Corey Barber from Spain Park in Alabama, where I was working on a little project, and just watching his film and seeing that I didn't realize that he was up to like 28 offers now and is a 247 like composite 4-star at this point in time. Like he's growing to a point where like it's, again, I don't think that Washington was ever really in the mix for a kid for just that particular kid, where it seemed like he was very interested in staying in the SEC, that sort of thing. But he's picked up so much steam, and you scroll through his Instagram or his Twitter or whatever, wherever these kids post all their offers nowadays, and it's, yep, Washington's right there as one of the first schools to do that. Like, it's always nice to see that. And I just feel like that's been such a case where I'm glad you mentioned Dominic Harris again, where Washington was the first offer. And now he's at 17, 18 with Auburn, Utah. There are some other big time schools that have gotten into the mix for him. And that's such a vital thing. And one of the important things to talk about with that is Jedd it's not just, Jedd and John Richardson, Kevin Cummings, Scottie Graham, who we know are all very, very good at this. One of the things that I think Washington has traditionally done very well with is bringing in strong off the field personnel to help with the recruiting personnel, whether it be, I want to talk about Marcus Griffin and Jalil Wadood in this class, just guys that they've brought in, and alongside, Matt Doherty, Jake Crawford, the senior and director of player personnel, where those are all guys who've done a really good job at identifying talent. And you look at that 2025 class where, as you and I do, we can go back and watch the film of some of the just bottom tier in terms of the ranked players in that class and still say, I understand why you took this player. I understand why you took that player. And I'm not going to, name any names of recruits because that's unfair. But I think especially when you look at the Jimmy Lake era, that wasn't always what happened. And I think that's something that moving forward is something that, if Jedd does want to stay here long-term, where that's always going to be a conversation around him, which we don't need to have, but if he does want to stay here long-term, that's something that I think Husky fans can take great comfort in saying, he wants to shoot for stars and he's going to talk a big game, and that's great. And if he lives up to it, awesome. You're going to be really happy with that. But I think you can always take solace in knowing that the talent identification is always going to be something that is a staple of his program.
Absolutely. I mean, that's again what you pay him $7.5+ million to do. Like, he's an NFL he's an NFL coach who's now running a college. It's an NFL program at the college level. And that's the sell. Like, okay, you should be able to evaluate talent. Like, if you work with the best, and it's all about projecting, because it's you can never going to anoint some kid like, hey, you will be this, because how many times even the sport that you love, baseball, where it's like, hey, that's a 5-tool prospect right there. And then 3 years later, it's like, kid flamed out in AA. It's like, right. It's not an exact science. If it were, we and you could do it and we wouldn't get paid anywhere near 7.5, because it's like, well, if everybody knows how to do it, it's all you got to do is plug in some numbers. It wouldn't be like that. That's also why Jedd Fisch, it attracts, because you can say, well, I know what it looks like in the NFL. I know what it can look like in high school, and I know the high-end players. And a lot of it also, like what we've talked about, and what the coaches have even hinted at, what Kevin Cummings said during the February press conference, where we like players from you don't want to say big time schools, but it's like guys that have already been coached at a high level. And it's not shooting at the making bad shots at the coaches of other schools, but it's just like saying, if you're already highly developed coming out of high school, it's easier and you're able to do more with, by proxy, players at a younger level. So when you come in as a freshman, it's not, well, we got to redshirt him because he's got to, not only put it on some weight, but he's got to, kind of learn the playbook, and it's going to take some time because he came from, no disrespect here, no shots fired, but the wing T, where it's like, oh, okay, sure. It's like there's certain offense where you come from and certain defensive schemes where it's like, yeah, or we played at like the 1A level, and it's like, hey, like now you're in the Big Ten, like you need to kind of level up, or you look at every single offer, it's 5A, 6A, and every now and then you get a 3A and a couple of 2A, but for the most part, it's like, it's really about just like, again, 6'8", 322, you can't like fake that. You go chase that type of player. Same thing with Victor Sanchez Hernandez, like you talk about, that's a big body, like maybe it won't work for the first couple of years because you want him to kind of get acclimated. You don't necessarily need to rush him like that. But by going into his junior year, it's like that's a guy where he's now a solid contributor, and you saw the size. Now it's just coming to fruition.
So I sort of like where you're going with that. I don't know if, division, like obviously, if you're talking about the Trinity League, that's a completely different discussion, right? Or, the league that IMG plays in out in Florida, like those are in Texas for the most part. There are a whole lot of those in Texas as well. I think that's a little bit of a different discussion in terms of just like, when you talk about 6A, 5A, I don't think you're wrong. Let me make that very clear. But I think it's one of those things where you can look at some of these established programs and it's developing a pipeline. We just talked about it with CJ Lavender on Friday, where getting kids from Mater Dei is never going to be a bad thing. Where Mater Dei has produced several Heisman winners. Like that's just the reality of a Mater Dei, of a St. John Bosco. Shout out to Trent McDuffie, where these big time programs produce big time players year in and year out. And if you're able to develop a strong relationship with some of those programs, and you can show them, show Bishop Gorman, show Mater Dei, St. John Bosco, hey, if you guys come here, we're playing you early year in and year out because we trust your coaching staff. That's solid. And of course, they're hearing that from every program in the country. So then it turns into Jedd and the staff's it's on them to actually sell the program and some of the other benefits and different things like that. Oh, please, you got something? Yeah.
Which is the irony of also like the staff as people that are on that staff. Julio Wadud, St. John Bosco, Taylor Mays, O'Day. Like you're talking like developing those pipelines. Like that pipeline comes full circle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's a fantastic point.
That's also why it's such a good sell and why it works, is because it's like, no, we're not just selling it. I'm literally I'm it. Like that's not me, obviously. I'm not Taylor May. Right. I'm not Julio. But like that's the whole point. It's like, no, like I'm not just selling you guys a bag of goods. I'm showing it to you right behind me.
Right. And that's such an important part. And I'm going to, just shamelessly self-promote our interview with CJ Lavender again, where, he talked about moving to safety full-time at the college level when he made his commitment, and talked about that with On3, talked about a little bit with us. Go check that interview out. And we asked him, just said, hey, how much does Taylor Mays play a part in that? And he said, yeah, I was just watching his film yesterday. I think that he's one of the best to ever do it, and getting, being somebody who lives in Southern California, watching him play at USC is a big part of that, where it's, that's something that resonates with him, not even just on the level of, I grew up here and I watched him play at USC, but it's I just actually watched that guy play and I see how good he was, where bringing that all for full circle is very, very important. And it's something that I'm really intrigued to watch with Taylor in particular. Is you've seen him do it on the field. Now we think he can sell it. Talking to CJ was a big part of that, but is he going to be able to coach it up as well? I think he can. And I'm really curious to see what that's going to look like going forward. But Lars, we're going to switch gears here because Washington is going to spend big in the transfer portal. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. Getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. With Game Time picks, curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. I just checked the Game Time app, and there are some amazing deals on some huge matchups going down at T-Mobile Park coming up, because I am so excited for baseball season. Let me tell you, I can't wait. I'm going to be using that Game Time app all the time because I just love the super deals with the lowest price guarantee. Game Time will cut even 110% of the difference. And with seat views before you buy, there are no surprise fees and a lowest price guarantee. You can book with total confidence. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
So Lars, an On3 report came out saying that an anonymous Big Ten head coach told, I think it was Jamie Shaw, that they're expecting Washington to spend big in the transfer portal. Now, Danny Sprinkle on KJR the other day not only said that Danny Sprinkle, that Zoom Diallo and Frank Kefnong have already signed to come back for the 25-26 season, which is really good news for the program. Obviously, if Frank can stay healthy, that's a massive piece on the inside. But that he expects to bring in 6 players is what he said he wants to sign. And we've already seen some of those names. Brock Harding is one. Nick Davidson's another one that they've identified. Kennard Davis. These are some of the guys we talked about the other day. But I think this is really good news to hear, because obviously that's what you want. And having, some big time donors is very important in this case, and having people who want to fund that NIL and everything. That's all great. But I trust Danny Sprinkle on the recruiting trail to get this done and find guys that are right for this program.
Yeah, you don't think that winner is motivated? Like, he knows, and again, it's one thing we always say. It's like Danny knows how to identify talent. We see that coming with JJ Mandaquit, Matty Troy, you go down the list.
Yeah.
But he knows he still has to supplement that in the transfer portal. And that's the key word there is supplement, because you don't want to just every year go and get 7-8 new players and say, all right, well, we're rebuilding again. Like, that's why keeping Zoo and Frank was so important, but also knowing it's like, well, you still need some help there. And I think you look at the list, the guys, Brock Harding is the one, obviously the big name. Iowa took a big step this past season. That one will be interesting for me because you said Zoom's y'all is coming back. So is Zoom, what is Zoom's role in that? And, because it's like every time, I'm not saying like that Danny would say that they're not coming back, but it's like, okay, well, you're signed until you don't show up. And it's like, oh, hey, actually, as it turns out, I do want to go to the board. It's like, I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but it's just like in this day and age, you never know. But that's why I think the draw of Danny Sprinkle is so important. And we both heard it in the end of season, basically, effectively press conference, not the one on a KJR, but the last game that they had
after Oregon. Yeah.
We're like, hey, like, we know what we need to do. Like, the problem isn't, oh, dang, we got to go back to the drawing board. It's like, no, The board is very clear. The problem is we need the right players to go get to fill that board out. And you're obviously seeing a lot of guards in there. Kennard Davis is another one that also intrigues me. Is a guy where that I think he's he's been at 2 schools now. I'm not so sure about that. But
no, just Southern Illinois. He was there for 2 years.
I'm thinking there was another guy that we're looking at that had been like in one school 1 year, then transferred and not transferred. Anyways, but the other kind of side of that is where we saw with Tyler Harris, where it's, hey, we saw the high potential, but it wasn't necessarily consistent. Can you find that consistency when bringing those guys that you're leveling up from, say, Southern Illinois, Washington?
So I think, I don't know if Harris is the best example, where I understand what you mean, where we saw him get consistently better over the course of the season. And he shot 50% behind the 3-point line for the season. He was also just the guy I enjoyed watching the most on the team. And when I look at Tyler Harris, I see somebody who can go up, but I understand what you mean, where it's, you want to search for that consistency. But I think the bigger point is, one of the things he said was after the Indiana game was, we need more guys that cared about basketball and made the team and basketball their number one priority, which he didn't name any names, but he said was the issue last year. And hey, all we can do is take him at his word for that at this time. So I kind of want to take that to just kind of transition to a really great question that we were asked by Insider Peter, that we gave him a little response and wanted to dive into it a little more on the show, which is this a sustainable way to build a team, to spend big in the portal every year? Or is it, just kind of a short-term thing while he, builds out his roster through recruiting? And I think it's just kind of like a middle, because it doesn't lean one way or the other, where with this program, I think having some pieces through the transfer portal is going to be really important every year, right? Whether it's an experienced big man, like say somebody leaves for the draft earlier or does want to transfer, and you didn't necessarily have a piece that you think can be physically ready to compete in the Big Ten right away coming in your high school class, where that's really important. Finding, a veteran shooter sometimes who's experienced some big game moments, maybe at a lower level, and wants to come up and play in the Big Ten. I think there's always a level of that's going to be really important to truly every program around the country when you talk about basketball through the transfer portal. But there's also a level of building a baseline through high school recruiting, which is something that, we saw after the Isaiah Stewart, Jaden McDaniels thing, that Mike Hopkins never could. And every single year you're going out and signing 8, 9, 10 players. And we saw how inconsistent and not sustainable that was. So I don't think Danny wants to go there, but I think there's going to be a level of maybe not, 6, 7, 8 guys, but 3, 4, 5, maybe, where it's okay. We need one particular thing. We need one guy to do one job. And there are going to be 3 or 4 of those roles maybe every year that you can just fill in with veteran depth here or there, which I don't think that's the worst road to go down.
No, although the way that I inferred that whole question was what else are you going to do? Moneyball it? You're not money. That's the one thing I want to make clear about this is bring it back to the principle of Washington's going to be big spenders. It's no matter what, whether you're developing the core of your roster year by year from the high school ranks, and JJ Manquit stays 2-3 years, and well, again, every year he's going to get a bump in NIL. He's going to, again, I'm just going to say NIL, but it's it's a bump in salary. The 3-year contract, the contract doesn't say 1 million, 1 million, 1 million. It's 1.2, 1.5.
Sure.
It's always going to increment, because again, unless by proxy, the product on the court does not, get better, and then in which case, it's probably gone at that point, anyways. And I'm not saying that just as JJ. I'm just saying him as that you could pick any player that would apply to, because that applies to all of them. Where, Washington's always going to apply its resources as they see fit in the best way possible. So if you happen to go get every year, every other year, 1 or 2 big key pieces, so be it. It's you're still building your core around the thing, around high school recruiting and development. But I feel no matter what, it's almost and again, people are going to hate this, but it's in professional basketball, it's if you ever want to get a free agent guard or a free agent forward just to supplement the roster, really make it even stronger, because by the way, you're in the Big Ten, not the Pac-12 anymore. So it's a situation hey, you need to make sure that bench is good 1 through 10, not just 1 through 5, maybe 6 or 7.
And when you mentioned the Big Ten, look at what it's looked like so far at March Madness. Let's be very clear. It's it's 2:02 p.m. right now on Sunday. So a couple teams in the Big Ten haven't played yet, but it's done so well so far in March Madness just as a conference, which I think could make some people feel a little better about the state of year one, where it's all these teams are finding a lot of success early on, and it's not a pass. It's not saying, oh, that's why UW finished last. Like, no, you never want to just set low expectations like that. But I think it might, like Danny Sprinkle talked at length and like throughout the season about learning what it takes to play in the Big Ten in terms of physicality, where it's like, yeah, you know what it's supposed to look like, but then you see it. Like you see Omar Ballo to Indiana come in. You see what it looks like when Purdue comes in and Trey Kaufman ran down low. I really like his game. I think he's really talented. Illinois comes in, what that group looks like, especially when they can get hot. UCLA, I know they lost to Tennessee, but the list goes on and on and on. Michigan, for example, with their 2 7-footers and Vlad Goldman, Danny Wolf. Like the list goes on and on of talent, especially down low, and just learning how to play in that might take a little bit longer, and you just didn't have that depth this year. And part of that was, according to Danny Sprinkle, when he came in and when he was able to take a job. And I think that's understandable. Again, it's not necessarily an excuse, and I don't think he wanted to, pass it off as one, but he said, I knew this was going to be a multi-year rebuild when I got here. And I think that's the most important thing to take away from this is if you're able to supplement this rebuild and kickstart it through the portal in year 2, where, let's just make an example here and say Kennard Davis does come in and he's somebody who isn't necessarily the leading scorer. If say Makai Mason or Tyler Harris comes back because they haven't, signed and Danny hasn't announced that. And he's, let's say, the second leading scorer, right behind Zoom Dial as of right now. I don't think that's a bad thing where you can just look at it and say, oh yeah, this guy helped us improve by 3 or 4 wins in the Big Ten. Like those are things you can't overlook.
No, well, that's essential. You can't just do, even if Zoom has a great season and balls out as your leading scorer. Well, he can't be the only one. We've seen that. I'm not saying Markel Phillips, but I'm just saying we've seen that product where it's, sure, hey, we got a great scorer. It's like, right, you need pieces around him. You need somebody in the post. You want to see a couple of guys in the post. And by the way, if Casey Beckway comes back and happens to take finally got to find his rhythm in the Big Ten, if you will. And, because now kind of what we're alluding to is like, everybody's got to plan until they get hit. That famous Mike Tyson quote. It's like, great. Once you get hit, now you felt it this season. Now you got to know how to deliver that counterpunch, which I think Danny Sprinkle is fully doing this offseason.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's 5-star reviews, it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.